Preparing for a business analyst at Sony interview? You've reached Candy Mentor, and this video is for you. We'll walk through 25 key questions you're likely to face. For each question you'll see a sample answer followed by the key points to cover. Subscribe, like, and share, and drop a topic request in the comments. Question 1. Why do you want to become a business analyst at Sony? Sony appeals to me because it combines technology, content, and consumer experiences, creating complex business questions that require more than spreadsheet analysis. I enjoy translating ambiguous problems into structured decisions, whether that means improving a product funnel, evaluating customer behavior, or supporting investment priorities. My strength is connecting data with practical recommendations and communicating clearly with technical and commercial stakeholders. I would bring curiosity, disciplined analysis, and a customer-focused mindset to Sony's diverse businesses. While answering, connect your analytical strengths to Sony's entertainment, gaming, electronics, and financial services ecosystem. Demonstrate genuine interest in cross-functional problem-solving, customer behavior, innovation, and measurable business impact. Question 2. What does a strong business analyst contribute to a company like Sony? A strong business analyst turns uncertainty into an actionable decision. At Sony, that could involve analyzing player engagement, content performance, hardware demand, or operational costs across different markets. I would clarify the business objective, identify the right data, test assumptions, and present options with trade-offs rather than merely reporting numbers. The role also requires follow-through, confirming implementation, monitoring outcomes, and adjusting the recommendation when evidence changes. That combination makes analysis commercially useful. Make sure to cover structured problem definition, reliable analysis, stakeholder alignment, clear communication, prioritization, and follow-through. Emphasize how recommendations should improve revenue, customer experience, efficiency, or strategic decision quality. Question 3. How would you approach an ambiguous business problem at Sony? I start by asking what decision needs to be made and what success looks like. Then I break the problem into drivers, such as customers, products, channels, geography, timing, and economics. For example, declining game sales could reflect awareness, conversion, pricing, availability, or retention. I would form hypotheses, validate them with internal and external data, and align stakeholders on assumptions. Finally, I would present a prioritized recommendation, risks, and an implementation plan. In your answer, talk about clarifying the decision, defining success metrics, breaking the problem into drivers, identifying stakeholders and data sources, testing hypotheses, and communicating assumptions before recommending action. Question 4. Tell me about a time you used data to influence a business decision. In a university project, an online retailer wanted to reduce customer churn. I combined transaction and service data, segmented customers by purchase frequency and complaint history, and found that repeat buyers with unresolved delivery issues were most likely to leave. I recommended proactive delivery alerts and targeted service recovery. The pilot reduced repeat customer complaints by 18% and improved retention. The experience taught me that a useful analysis identifies a specific action, not just an interesting pattern. Be sure to mention the original business question, data preparation, analytical method, insight, stakeholder challenge, recommendation, and measurable result. Use a concise star structure and quantify impact where possible. Question 5. How would you evaluate the performance of a new PlayStation feature? I would first define the feature's intended outcome, higher engagement, stronger retention, improved satisfaction, or incremental monetization. Then I would track exposure, adoption, repeat usage, session duration, retention, crashes, support contacts, and relevant revenue metrics. I would compare users who receive the feature with a suitable control group, while segmenting by market, device, and player type. I would also review qualitative feedback, because a feature can increase usage while damaging trust or usability. Focus on defining the feature's objective, selecting adoption, engagement, retention, satisfaction, technical quality, and commercial metrics. Distinguish leading indicators from long-term outcomes and use controlled testing where practical. Question 6. What KPIs would you use to assess a Sony entertainment product? I would select KPIs based on the product's objective and maturity. Acquisition metrics might include reach, conversion, and cost per acquired customer. Engagement could include active users, viewing or play time, frequency, and completion. Retention, churn, subscription renewal, average revenue per user, and contribution margin measure sustainability. I would also monitor satisfaction, complaints, and technical quality. For a new product, leading engagement indicators matter first. Later, retention and economics become more important. Make sure to distinguish acquisition, engagement, retention, monetization, customer satisfaction, and operational metrics. Explain that KPI selection depends on the product's lifecycle, business model, and strategic objective. Question 7. How would you analyze a decline in PlayStation user engagement? I would confirm whether engagement truly declined or whether tracking, seasonality, or the user mix changed. Next, I would segment the trend by console generation, title, player cohort, region, and activity type. I would examine content releases, outages, pricing, updates, competitor launches, and user feedback. Comparing affected and unaffected cohorts would help isolate drivers. I would then recommend a targeted response, such as improving onboarding or content cadence, and define recovery metrics with a review date. In your answer, segment the decline by platform, title, cohort, geography, and time. Investigate product, content, pricing, technical, and competitive drivers before recommending targeted interventions and monitoring recovery. Question 8. How would you determine whether a Sony streaming or content investment is financially attractive? I would build a driver-based model rather than relying on a single revenue estimate. Key inputs would include addressable audience, acquisition, conversion, pricing, viewing or usage behavior, retention, content costs, marketing, platform costs, and revenue sharing. I would calculate contribution margin, cash payback, and scenario outcomes, then test sensitivity to adoption and churn. I would also consider strategic benefits, such as stronger ecosystem engagement, while clearly separating those benefits from directly measurable financial returns. Cover audience potential, revenue assumptions, content and marketing costs, contribution margin, retention effects, scenario analysis, break-even timing, cannibalization, strategic value, and sensitivity to uncertain forecasts. Question 9. What is the difference between correlation and causation, and why does it matter in Sony analysis? Correlation means two variables move together. Causation means one produces a change in the other. For example, users who watch more content may also spend more on a platform, but that does not prove viewing caused spending because highly engaged users may differ in many ways. I would look for confounding factors, use controlled experiments where feasible, and compare matched cohorts or pre- and post-trends. This matters because Sony should fund interventions that create value, not merely coincide with it. Be sure to explain that correlation shows association, not cause. Discuss confounding variables, selection bias, experiments, controls, and why incorrect causal conclusions can lead to ineffective product or investment decisions. Question 10. How would you design an A/B test for a Sony digital product? I would begin with a specific hypothesis, such as a redesigned checkout increasing completed purchases. Users would be randomly assigned to control and treatment groups, with the primary metric defined before launch. I would add guardrails for cancellation, errors, complaints, and latency, then estimate the required sample size and test duration. Afterward, I would assess statistical and commercial significance, review segment effects, and confirm that results are not driven by a temporary event before scaling. Discuss the hypothesis, treatment and control groups, randomization, primary metric, guardrails, sample size, test duration, segmentation, statistical significance, and practical significance before recommending rollout. Question 11. How would you forecast demand for a Sony hardware product? I would combine a baseline forecast from historical sales with bottom-up drivers. Those drivers could include installed base, replacement cycles, price, promotion, distribution coverage, pre-orders, seasonality, competitor launches, and supply constraints. I would create base, upside, and downside cases, making assumptions explicit. I would compare forecast demand with manufacturing and channel capacity, then refresh the model using early sales and pre-order signals. A good forecast supports inventory decisions while acknowledging uncertainty rather than disguising it. Mention historical sales, launch timing, price, promotions, distribution, inventory, market size, competitor activity, seasonality, pre-orders, and scenario ranges. Explain how you would update the forecast as new evidence arrives. Question 12. How would you investigate a product with growing revenue but falling profitability? I would reconcile the profit change into revenue, mix, pricing, discounts, variable costs, fixed costs, marketing, returns, foreign exchange, and channel effects. Revenue growth may come from lower margin products, heavier promotions, or costly customer acquisition. I would compare actual results with budget and prior periods, then segment by product, market, and channel. After identifying the driver, I might recommend pricing changes, mix improvement, supplier actions, or marketing reallocation, supported by quantified scenarios. Focus on decomposing price, volume, mix, discounts, variable costs, fixed costs, marketing, returns, foreign exchange, and channel economics. Separate temporary effects from structural deterioration and propose corrective actions. Question 13. What SQL skills would you use as a business analyst at Sony? I would use SQL to extract and validate data before analysis. Core skills include joins, filtering, aggregation, conditional logic, date handling, common table expressions, and window functions for cohort or ranking analysis. I would check duplicates, missing values, grain, and reconciliation totals before trusting the output. For example, I might calculate monthly active users and retention by acquisition cohort. I would document definitions carefully so stakeholders understand exactly what each metric represents. Mention joins, filtering, aggregation, window functions, common table expressions, date logic, deduplication, validation, and performance awareness. Connect SQL output to a clearly defined business question and trustworthy reporting. Question 14. How do you ensure data quality before presenting an analysis? I begin by confirming the source, data owner, refresh frequency, and business definition of each important field. I check row counts, missing values, duplicates, date ranges, outliers, and relationships between tables. I reconcile totals to an independent report or known benchmark and investigate unexpected changes. I also test a small sample manually and document limitations. Before presenting, I ask whether the result is commercially plausible, because technical completeness alone does not guarantee analytical accuracy. In your answer, cover source reliability, field definitions, completeness, accuracy, consistency, duplicate checks, reconciliations, outlier review, refresh timing, and independent reasonableness tests before distribution. Question 15. How would you explain a complex analysis to a non-technical Sony executive? I would lead with the decision, headline finding, and business implication rather than the methodology. 4. Focus on starting with the decision and headline, using plain language, showing only relevant evidence, explaining assumptions and trade-offs, tailoring detail to the audience, and ending with a clear recommendation. Question 16. Tell me about a time you handled conflicting stakeholder requirements. On a reporting project, finance wanted detailed monthly reconciliation while operations wanted a simple daily dashboard. I met both groups separately, identified the underlying decisions, and proposed a two-layer solution: a concise operational view supported by a detailed finance tab. We agreed on common definitions and escalation rules, then piloted the design with users. Both teams adopted it, and reporting time fell by approximately 30%. The experience reinforced that conflicting requests often reflect different decisions, not incompatible goals. Use a specific example showing how you clarified objectives, identified conflicts, prioritized criteria, used evidence, facilitated agreement, documented decisions, and maintained relationships while protecting project outcomes. Question 17. How would you prioritize several urgent requests from Sony stakeholders? I would assess each request against impact, urgency, risk, effort, dependencies, and strategic alignment. A customer-impacting issue or decision blocking a major launch would generally outrank a useful but non-urgent enhancement. I would confirm deadlines and consequences with stakeholders, create a visible priority list, and communicate what will be delayed. If priorities remain contested, I would escalate the trade-off with facts and options. This approach keeps decisions transparent and prevents the loudest request from automatically winning. Mention business impact, urgency, risk, dependencies, effort, strategic alignment, regulatory or customer consequences, transparent trade-offs, and regular communication. Avoid prioritizing solely by seniority or noise. Question 18. How would you assess customer churn for a Sony subscription service? I would define churn precisely, separating voluntary cancellations from failed payments or expired access. Then I would analyze churn by acquisition cohort, tenure, usage intensity, plan, geography, price changes, content exposure, service incidents, and support history. I would identify leading signals such as declining engagement or payment problems and estimate customer lifetime value. Retention actions should be tested carefully, because discounts may reduce churn but also erode margin or reward customers who would have stayed. Cover churn definition, customer cohorts, voluntary versus involuntary churn, tenure, usage, price, service quality, content, payment failures, predictive signals, retention economics, and ethical intervention design. Question 19. How would you evaluate a marketing campaign for a Sony product? I would define the campaign objective first, such as incremental purchases, subscriptions, awareness, or reactivation. I would establish a baseline and track reach, conversion, cost per incremental customer, revenue, margin, and longer-term retention. Where possible, I would use holdout groups or geographic testing to separate true lift from organic demand. I would compare channels and audience segments, then evaluate lifetime value rather than only first-order revenue. The final recommendation would reallocate spend toward proven incremental impact. Discuss objectives, target audience, baseline, attribution, incremental conversions, cost, lifetime value, channel performance, control groups, brand effects, and post-campaign learning rather than relying on impressions alone. Question 20. How would you analyze whether Sony should enter a new market? I would assess the market size, growth, customer needs, competitive intensity, regulation, distribution access, and localization requirements. Then I would test whether Sony has a differentiated right to win through its technology, content, brand, or ecosystem. I would build entry economics including investment, pricing, acquisition cost, margin, payback, and downside scenarios. Rather than treating entry as binary, I would consider a pilot or partnership that validates demand and operational feasibility before committing significant capital. Be sure to cover market size and growth, customer needs, competition, regulation, localization, distribution, capabilities, investment, economics, risks, and staged validation before recommending entry. Question 21. What would you do if your analysis contradicted a senior stakeholder's preferred conclusion? I would first recheck definitions, data quality, methodology, and assumptions to ensure the disagreement is genuine. Then I would discuss the result privately and respectfully, focusing on evidence rather than personalities. I would explain the conclusion, show sensitivity to key assumptions, and ask what information might change the decision. If uncertainty remains, I would present alternatives, risks, and a low-cost validation step. My goal would be to improve the decision, not to win an argument. Focus on respectful challenge, checking definitions and data first, separating facts from assumptions, presenting sensitivity ranges, understanding the stakeholder's objective, and offering practical alternatives rather than simply rejecting the view. Question 22. How do you manage deadlines when you do not have all the data? I would clarify which decision must be made now and what level of confidence is sufficient. I would use the most reliable available data, supplement gaps with clearly labeled proxies, and create a range rather than false precision. I would document assumptions, limitations, and the potential decision impact of missing information. I would communicate early if the deadline creates material risk, then schedule follow-up work to validate the conclusion. Timeliness matters, but transparency protects decision quality. Mention identifying the minimum viable analysis, distinguishing facts from assumptions, using reliable proxies, quantifying uncertainty, communicating limitations early, and planning follow-up validation after the immediate decision. Question 23. Describe a time you made a mistake in an analysis. In an academic sales analysis, I initially included canceled orders in the revenue total because I misunderstood the transaction status field. During a reconciliation, the result exceeded the finance report, so I traced the discrepancy, corrected the query, and informed the project lead immediately. I then added status validation and a reconciliation check to the process. The mistake taught me to confirm data definitions with owners and build independent controls before presenting conclusions, even under tight deadlines. Choose a genuine but manageable mistake. Explain detection, root cause, immediate correction, stakeholder communication, control improvement, and the lesson learned without blaming others or minimizing the impact. Question 24. What role does financial analysis play in a business analyst position at Sony? Financial analysis translates operational choices into economic consequences. I would connect customer or product metrics with revenue, variable cost, contribution margin, cash investment, payback, and forecast risk. For example, higher engagement is valuable only if it improves retention, monetization, or strategic positioning enough to justify its cost. I would use scenarios and sensitivities to show decision ranges, while incorporating customer experience and long-term capability. The aim is balanced resource allocation, not maximizing one short-term metric. Cover revenue, costs, margin, cash flow, investment returns, budgeting, forecasting, scenario analysis, and KPI linkage. Explain how financial analysis supports choices without replacing customer or strategic considerations. Question 25. If selected, how would you make an impact during your first 90 days at Sony? During the first month, I would learn Sony's business area, customers, decision processes, systems, KPI definitions, and stakeholder expectations. In the next phase, I would audit existing reporting, identify data quality issues, and deliver a practical quick win, such as simplifying a recurring analysis or improving a dashboard. By day 90, I would propose a prioritized roadmap with owners, benefits, risks, and success measures. I would focus on listening first, then earning trust through accurate, useful delivery. In your answer, describe learning the business and stakeholders, understanding data definitions and existing processes, delivering a quick win, building credibility, and creating a prioritized roadmap tied to measurable outcomes. If you are still with us, congratulations. You are much ahead of the rest and serious about preparing for your interview. We hope we were able to add value to your preparation and create some helpful content. Do not forget to like and share this video. Your small act can do great things for us.